My name is Rob, and I actually had the pleasure of running into Darren here today. So this is Darren, and was like, you know what? We're going to pull an audible. Let's have some fun. So the genesis really of, besides being a good friend and colleague, is that part of the discussion today is on domain-driven design, and it's how do we actually take and leverage some of the latest tooling, some of the latest thought processes in enhancing domain-driven design. And domain-driven design is a method of doing plenty of things, but for this audience, a lot of it is software delivery, as well as organizational change management. And Darren and I had the unique experience of actually doing an enterprise-wide domain-driven design effort at a DHS agency, USCIS. The effort was aptly named e-processing, which was essentially the digitization of, you were part of that too. There you go, Morgan. Bob was there too, although he actually set the stage and the foundational pillars, but we'll let him have that chat another time. That's his story to tell. But this effort really was pushed by the director at the time, and it was, again, it had visibility across the entire organization. Everybody was supposed to get in line and move forward. So part of the discussion today, just a quick overview of DDD. Has anybody ever heard of domain-driven design? I know a few of you have. Awesome. It's kind of a hit or a miss in industry today. It's got a decent history, but some folks are like FDDD, we're doing clean architecture, or evolving architecture, whatever. But I feel like if you're in a certain situation, especially when you're trying to solve very challenging problems at a decent sized scale, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you have some organizations that need a little bit of change, which is something we'll talk about. So we'll talk about some of those challenges. We'll also talk about, again, how I'd like to show you, and we'll talk about some of how artificial intelligence, machine learning plays a role for today and then the future in domain-driven design and just software delivery writ large or development. And then I'll follow up with, hey, I like to show you some stuff. I'd rather not just stand up here and talk. I'm going to show you some cool shit. So Darren, if you don't mind just introducing yourself as well.
Yeah. So this is the beautiful mind that I got to work with. Rob's not only a friend, but he was a client at the time. And so navigating federal space, coming in with new ideas, calling out, people's babies that are ugly, but also trying to work in a space in which you can build something and ignore organizational structure, ignore turf, ignore who owned what, and just come in and say, what would be the right way to structure this based on what we are trying to accomplish? What is the mission of the agency? What are we responsible to do? And so I was a coach working across the organization. Rob was the CTO, and we got sort of tasked amongst other people to sort of figure this out. So we had our agile processes. We were buying agile teams. There was agile contracts. There wasn't agile budgeting. There was borderline agile acquisitions, but it was federal work. But if you walked into this space, it didn't feel like it. One of the big things, Rob will talk a lot about domain-driven design, but we spent a lot of time visualizing the work, which is one of those principles we talk about going back to the basics that I think is for me, core, because not only can you figure out how we're going to work together, I don't care where you come from, what you do, but we can argue about the diagram instead of arguing about each other, egos, turf, who owns what roles and responsibilities. So it was one of the first steps in sort of figuring out what we're trying to do, who's involved. And when people saw this picture, they realized it's an everybody problem. We need to do this. Let's go. Of course, it got really messy as we started going, but that's what this picture sort of represented. We did have a shared vision. We had director, sort of coming down and saying, this is what we need to do, which sort of brought everyone together, we thought, at least from the get-go.
Yeah, we actually probably had the strongest champion as an associate director in the organization that was beating our drum and beating everybody else's ass. So that was a big help. But still, the friction regardless existed. Just to give a very sort of academic overview of domain-driven design, we're looking at this picture, looking from the top down. Again, we focus, I think, sometimes too much in the problem space and not really in the collaborate space, as illustrated here. But the core tenet, and as we started this journey, first of all, we had to figure out how are we going to figure this out? We had no idea, really, how we're just going to buy teams and throw money at it, or we just putting people at it in their own individual portfolios. So we were putting our heads together with other like business, with actual real business folks that had been in the organization, had been adjudicators, that knew everything about the business. We actually all solidified and came up with this domain-driven design as the way to move forward. And we coupled that essentially with the inverse Conway's law, where we knew there was going to be a lot of friction in the fiefdoms that existed. So we wanted to start to take an approach of changing the architecture, changing the delivery model, and actually make organizational change follow suit. Again, our fingers were crossed big time in that approach. Plus, we thought we had some good people beating the drums. Regardless, from a domain-driven design perspective, we started to identify what that core domain is. And what is that core domain? Like, what is that most important business function that can stand alone on itself? Then we started to identify the supportive and then the generative domains that really, again, the foundational pieces, and then kind of those third-party bits that help support us. And that helped, for us, that helped prioritize everything that Darren has just stated, like where do you put money and teams and effort, and then what exists, and start to bring this from our diagram here, where are the people starting to collaborate. So we started in certain areas like identity management, case management, risk and fraud, these sorts of, again, this is an immigration, so a lot of this was delivering benefits or a digital product. And these were all of the business functions to enable that to actually happen.
Let's take a breath. All right. So really what we tried to do is, going back to the pictures from the earlier presentations, is instead of destroying the house, we just sort of pretended it wasn't there, and we went over here on this borrowed lease property, and we built the new structure in sort of a virtual way of, this is how this collaborative, domain-driven design, figuring out what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it, what the delivery model is going to look like, sort of what is the new operating model, as I would say, for this space to deliver on this mission. So we'll dive into some of the details, and Rob's dying to dive into the details.
No, it's all right. We got limited time.
But so if you think of that picture of the tractor crushing the house, like we just sort of said, no, we're just going to leave the house there. It's historic. We'll leave it alone. We're going to build this thing and just pretend it's not there. It later haunted us a little bit, but it was, how do we look at the future, build the future, and then start acting, model the behavior you want to see in the world. And that's what we started doing.
For those that know what that house was.
Yes.
Regardless, again, to Darren's point, we actually started to identify these teams. Sometimes it would be multiple teams. We'd start to bring these teams together based upon these bounded contexts. They already had domain knowledge. They already had a product owner. Most of the time it was somebody eating chicken nuggets in the corner from the business. So that was a big sort of ask and a push on the business side. Give us real SMEs. None of this bullshit chicken, coloring in the corner nonsense, which is a lot of what happens in the government. So actually we were able to obtain really good domain experts that sat with the domain technical SMEs, so they actually start to understand and build this ubiquitous language, common language for the domains. And then start to find out where the friction areas were, or what the ingress and egress areas were, clearly as represented in this diagram. So that was sort of our approach. And then
just real quick, so in my language, the business is like, what capabilities do we need to build to support the ultimate mission? What are the groups of people we need to put together to build these capabilities? And then Rob would step in with his team and say, what are the technical capabilities, and how do we build the architecture to match, that capability of the organization? We were just talking about business reference models. In the government space, enterprise architecture, you have to have a business reference model. I always thought it was a useless Excel sheet. And you actually read it, it actually calls out all of the capabilities, the reason why the agency actually exists. And you're like, oh, if I can map the reason why the agency exists to capabilities, to products, to technology.
Yeah, and really ultimately a workflow. Or a
But
business
oftentimes that traceability doesn't exist. Sometimes the BRM isn't there. So how do you start building that model? Because then it states the why. And no one argues what the why is. They may argue technology. They may argue the how. They may even argue the operating model. But like, how do you build the picture that you can argue about instead of the egos that want to argue with each other? And then how do you have an intellectual conversation about what we're actually trying to build, drive to? And some of this was in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, but at least the picture, the vision was drawn.
Yeah, again, a lot of it came down to some of these discrete aggregates, like these little white boxes that you see in each of these circles. You know, what that becomes something that Darren just mentioned. This becomes like a real business process, something that's tangible that nobody can really disagree with, except when there's a policy change. So that's great. You've heard, you know, that's a lot of things we've said, and it was a lot of work. One of the techniques that we employed to make this happen, especially when you've got a good team in a bounded context with their own ubiquitous language, actually building a product and actually ultimately building microservices and APIs, how do they start to interface with another team, another bounded context, building their APIs? Or as we sort of skipped from a technical perspective, we went straight into eventing and started to really leverage Kafka. So it was a complete re-architecture of just doing straight up events. Regardless, one of the techniques we employed was event storming. Has everybody done event storming in the past? It's not for the weak of heart, without a doubt. It takes time, energy, and effort. And this is actually like a real awesome representation of the output. Yeah. So it's multiple teams, everybody in a room. It could last 1 day, 2 days, it could last 3 days, even a week. But the intent, going back to the very first diagram, is we're all collaborating. We all are agreeing on these bits. Now, how do we make this happen? And it would happen in a flow from really, as you can see in this diagram, really from right to left, what's actually transpiring. What does that business flow look like? What are those ingresses, egresses? Who's responsible? What's the hard and fast, like a platform that may be used? What's a parking lot item? So,
yeah. And I think the powerful thing of it that I saw, because I didn't know anything about it, Rob brought it in. It was a very technical solution, or it was a process to build technical solutions in my eyes as a coach. And then as I walked through it, you could just see the business being bored out of their minds in the first part of the conversation, the technical people arguing about this and that, X's and O's, ones and zeros. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, you want to know about the business process and the technology? And it really brought the teams together to have a group conversation about what the heck are we trying to do? What does it mean to the business? What does it mean to technology? And then why does the business care about technology? And all of a sudden our business folks started like, you know, learning about Kafka and microservices, and we started putting product owners to APIs. So we actually had a product owner of an API, and we had a couple folks come in and give some talks about how they're using them in other agencies in the private sector. And it's like, oh, all right, well, this makes sense. And all of a sudden now we had a common language leveraging the APIs, how to have common language around integrations. And these were conversations that were being driven out of the business or with the business involved, instead of just saying that's an IT problem. So it was really a way to bring people together, getting back to the collaboration piece by using a tool and granted, it wasn't all smooth, and these things can get very tedious, but the conversation was very fruitful to sort of bring the whole team together, build a common mission, common vision.
So just to keep you going, I want to keep going on some of the challenges here. I mean, you've heard a lot about time, energy, it's a lot of people, it's expensive. Again, the other challenges, especially as it relates to building out domains and eventing and getting all these people together. What other challenges could you recall? Organizational change was difficult. Fiefdoms were difficult. Can you think of any other real hard changes that we sort of overcame, or just it became a pillar, a pillar or a rock that we couldn't break water on?
Yeah, I think the hard part was, one is the people who are available are usually not the people you want. So you had to get this, true subject matter experts, the business folks who wanted to get engaged and get involved. I think from a technical perspective, we had multiple contracts, multiple contractors, and multiple feds with some technical ability. And none of them were at the same level, so the arguments and the power struggles was a thing. And we just had to hash through it. The more we did in the beginning, the easier it was as we sort of started doing the work, so to speak. So as much as those Post-it notes look awful, it was a process, it was a journey, but the fruits of the labor from that initial kickoff, event storming, really paid off in years to come as far as what we were trying to do. And Rob, I know you want to get into you have some, I think, demos that I think this group would really like to see.
We've got 10 minutes.
Right? All right.
Okay. Well, first of all, just so we can riff off each other continuing, because it's much more exciting.
Yeah.
I've already, just being here, I've already heard plenty of people talk about tools and the potential. We've already had, Bob led a great session, or conducted, I should say, a great session, which did a great job in bringing those two together. So, I mean, has anybody used any of these things? I mean, there's so many tools, like the ramp of adoption here is, and as well as new tooling is like through the roof. The rate or hockey stick is, it's not a hockey stick anymore, but has anybody actually really dived in and used these tools? Couple, just raise your hand. ChatGPT, so a little bit of prompting. Has anybody like actually seen a tool where AI, even if it is ChatGPT to some degree, has been embedded into the tool or platform you're using? Okay. So keeping it in vein with DDD, I'd like to show you, sort of walk you through a little bit of a progression from ChatGPT, what does that look like from a DDD perspective, and we'll emphasize that, to I'm going to show you a tool that's leveraging that same back-end technology, but it's already baked into the platform itself and provides output based upon artificial intelligence. So
this is where the beautiful mind kicks in. So Rob, I think this is a list of tools that are possible. Great, but may change tomorrow. So yeah. Take it for food for thought. I think the great thing as Rob starts setting up to do this demo is he's going to show a lot of the stuff that we do in story mapping, taking epics and breaking them down into user stories or features into, sorry, I have my safe, features, epics, and stories, or epics and stories, however you do it in your organization. I don't care. But that whole exercise, as you watch Rob walk through this demo, I think it's, as an Agile coach, non-technologist, that it's sort of exciting to see how this thing can turn out.
Has anybody messed with or created a GPT or know what it is? Anybody? Awesome, awesome, cool, thank you. That makes me so happy. So it's great, like ChatGPT, just that interface. What's really cool is now you can start to build your own sort of localized ChatGPTs as just a straight up GPT. If you haven't done it, if you've got a subscription, I highly recommend testing it out. It'll just take you to another level and understanding how this technology works and its benefit. But just I would like to show you, because we're talking about domain-driven design. These are all the actual GPTs, some group, organization, individual, in this ecosystem, this marketplace, and there's more, have put together for ChatGPT, or for domain-driven design. Unbelievable. So what I'd like to do is show you just something very simple. This is something that a group made. Here's the individuals. It's got the marketplace is very cool. I'm going to actually tell it to create this operation, which again is creating from what we just talked about within the bounded context. This would be an aggregate, or let's just say a microservice that would be inside of this money object. So you can see how quickly this works. I'm sure you guys have seen this before, so I won't go through it all. But again, this is just something that's already somebody's built. You don't even have to build it anymore, and it's specific to this language. There's other languages. PHP, there's, you name it, Java, JavaScript, through the roof. So again, this is sort of the basic stuff.
So as an organization, how do you spend money on the things you can't automatically do or can't be automated? How do you spend the money on the intuition, the thought, the things that haven't been figured out yet? And how do you leverage the stuff that already has?
So again, we've talked a lot about application development, how we introduce AI. Already baked into this GPT, this artificial intelligence generative AI tool, all I have to do is, to create these tests, I just have to punch one. And a list of various other objects that are just at my fingertips, like again, one keystroke away to exercise against this money object I've just created, or that I told somebody to create. Super simple. So I did hear, again, a lot today about, well, there's security in our AI group up here. How do we deal with that? It looks like all of this is external, just like ChatGPT. I can't do anything about it. I'm happy to share with anybody. This is something that's running on this laptop right now. It's totally localized. I can set it to go outside to hit other external entities like the large language models. But this entire interface, including the information, which is so critical, is all localized to this laptop. This is nothing but a Docker container running essentially a large language model, an indexer, and a parser, and providing essentially this RAG or chat interface, all local. So this is something you could take to your organization, work with your security folks, and have it up and running. Well, it's typically a security because they take forever, but have it running in a matter of, it took me probably 10 minutes to get this thing up and running on my laptop. And then that was with configuration and putting PDFs into a local folder on this laptop as well that does get indexed and parsed.
So Rob knows where the information's coming from because he put it in himself. So that's another way to sort of know what you do know and what you don't know based on what you fed the system.
So this, just to help close things out, as I was continuing to work in this space, this is a tool that I stumbled across, especially in domain-driven design. This is a group, a European group that have built this software, and they originally were building it specifically for domain-driven design and managing, teams, like doing event storming and things of that. Some of the things we've already talked about. Gen AI came out, and they quickly adopted it and integrated it into their product. And essentially, like magic, which I'm about to show you, it actually just started to create things like an event storming session. It started to create user stories, problems, the opportunities, what system it would actually belong to. And then you can start to create out of the systems and the commands your core foundation for DDD, those core principles, the bounded context, your aggregates, and your commands. So I, based upon what we've just discussed, immigration, I just put in at the very top, create a workflow containing that language. So essentially, 590 is application to be a refugee, which has some political merit these days. I'm just going to tell it to go. Whoops. And I'm going to let you guys see the output of this. This blew me away when I saw it, so I just want to share it with this group here. It is pretty darn impressive. So all I did was feed it that text. That's it. That is it. That workflow that you saw up in the top. And now it's automatically generating this workflow with these personas. So again, this is, and I can show you more. I'll let it continue, but where are we? If it'll let me, no, not yet.
So as you're looking at this story mapping exercise, understanding how your initiative, Epic, relates back to a workflow, relates back to a problem, relates back to systems, based on how you fed the system, this could be a quick way to get to a rough draft, at least, vet it based on human interaction or your product owner and your development team to have a conversation around, hey, how crappy or good was AI in creating what we need to work on in the next program increment, or the next 3 months, or the next month, et cetera, or what do we need to do to complete this mission, so to speak. And so
Here's
it
an
is a
output.
way.
Yeah, I mean, you've captured it perfectly. And just, I mean, to me, this is, what we've just done with entering that prompt is an event storming session that could have taken a week. So we've reduced that time dramatically. Now what I would do is I'd have my domain expert, business me, and my IT technical staff, like an agilist like Darren, come in and actually start to vet this. In this tool, I could vet it wherever. I could just share this like a mural board or what have you, and start to tweak it. So I've got very specific areas where the business can work and have the very same language. Everybody's seeing the same thing, and where the technical folks can work to start to build out the system, the commands. And then once you finally actually figured out where things are, what the flow looks like, what the systems are, either they already exist or they're new, or it's something like a biographic system from CBP at the border, which would be external. All of this could be mapped up very cleanly. And then what I don't have time to show you is ultimately I can create a data model from this. So it'll create a full schema. And then after I've modified or harmonized that, it'll actually generate either .NET code or JavaScript code and create a microservice for one of the systems or all the systems that I've built in this interface.
And as a product owner, you could build your backlog based on what you've learned from this exercise. So both from a technical perspective, you're meeting some check boxes. From a product owner, you've just gotten a whole lot smarter and a whole lot more technical, even if you're not technical. Is it all right? It comes back down to the conversation with the business and your architects. But it's a lot easier to work off of something than it is a blank slate.
So I don't work for this company. The company's name is Clarify, as represented down here. If you have a chance, I'd definitely check it out. You'd probably find some utility in it, or at least something to do when you got some downtime on the weekend. But thank you very much, you guys, for your time.